Okay, thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really excited about this topic area. This is something greenhouse infrastructure in general has been brought to us by many tribal communities across the country as they look to earmark funding for CARES Act monies, as well as in providing direct response to their communities during the COVID-19 era. We have an expert in the field with our own Stephen Bond here from Intertribal Agriculture Council, and we're really grateful that he's taken some time to design out a really nice presentation for us and consult with a lot of great contacts that he has in this field. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Stephen. Thank you again so much, Stephen.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Kira, and I do get excited over greenhouse structure and developing the presentations to share this information. So I put together a cursory overview of greenhouse styles ranging in scale and scope of production. So I'm gonna pull up my screen. Okay. So, Kira, we see in the first page of the presentation?
Yep, looks great.
Excellent, excellent. So, so we titled this "Greenhouse Infrastructure, Commercial Vegetable Production, Scale, Scope, and Execution." There are a lot of variability, issues to consider across the country. So, since we have such a broad audience, this national audience, I kind of kept this very broad, and we're going to have a part 2. So we can address any of the questions that arise today, that we don't get to in the question and answer session. And there's just far too many topics that we could get tangled up in. So for instance, hydroponics and irrigation, we're not going to go into any detail of that unless there's some specific questions that we can start that conversation on. Let's just take a look at a few of the slides that we put together. So when considering greenhouse production, you've essentially have already evaluated your potential for field production. In some instances, greenhouse production can complement field production because of seasonality. A great example of that is tomato availability. So the premium that you're getting in the greenhouse production model is going to go down with the widespread availability of field tomato production coming out of California. And so that could be another consideration, is if you're going to get a premium for a product. For instance, hydroponically produced lettuce is going to be a nice clean head of lettuce or a nice clean bagged lettuce, and it may look better than a field produced lettuce, but you also have that seasonal variability. So the most important reason to consider greenhouse production over field production is for control over all the environmental variability. So you truly can grow anything anywhere if you have the water and electricity in a greenhouse operation. So I've touched specialty crops are kind of the category of vegetable production, fruit production, things that you would find in a greenhouse, but also things more broadly associated with horticulture versus maybe field production, crop production, and livestock. So so I've also plugged in some cost considerations on this slide. There's a lot of things for folks to read because we're going to be utilizing this as a teaching tool, and it's going to be available for everyone to download. But the high upfront costs, greenhouse production, it's more expensive to produce. You also are going to have some specialized staff that's going to be operating this facility in a different sort. The horticulture inside a greenhouse may be more palatable to some folks than field labor. or operating large machinery. So when we're looking at the differences, there's quite a bit of difference. It's essentially two different operations. So if you decided you're going to do greenhouse production because of seasonal variability, or maybe you don't have really good fertile land to do field production, or don't want to gear up, or whatever the reason is, you need to evaluate a good site. So all the usual things, you're going to want good drainage, parking, buffers, and probably going to want to think about expanding. Most greenhouse operations, if they're successful, are going to expand every year, especially their first 5 years, or have a if you can load produce on the back of a truck and it looks good and it's everything's right, then you're going to sell a lot of it. So you can use your capital to finance some expansion. All right, so water quality and quantity. It could be a deal breaker if you don't have adequate water, or meaning a reliable flow, or a certain water quality. Then it may be cost prohibitive to supply water to a greenhouse. So when we're talking about commercial large-scale greenhouse production, we're going to be talking about some variation of hydroponics. So it's going to be either a non-recovery hydroponic system, where we're piping a fertilizer solution to the plants, and it's being drained out through our drains and maybe detained in a detention pond that runs alongside our facility. Or we're going to have some type of recovery system, but even a bag of soilless medium would still be a variation of hydroponics. So you're going to want a good water quality going into that initial system, because nevertheless, you'd likely need RO, or ROs are always recommended, because it helps the plants absorb the nutrients in the solution when they're not competing with hard water components. Calcium and other things can throw your water balance off. So water quality, huge. That's a big one. Of course, when you're setting up the greenhouse, depending on your orientation, it's going to increase your solar access. Topography, you want a gentle slope. So if you have some gently sloping property in mind already, it can save you a lot in preparation cost. And you want that area to be accessible for your not only good ingress egress for your employees and deliveries, but also you're going to be shipping out pallets of produce at a time, and so you're going to need it to be semi-accessible. Utilities, they can be a significant portion of a greenhouse operation, and so you're going to want to bring some folks in the initial planning stages that can address that. I'll later talk about how when you contact a greenhouse wholesaler, they're going to often be a turnkey service, and they're going to have the what you need to hand off to your additional contractors to make sure you have the right service on site. And then, of course, there's always regulations. I know that for the CARES Act purposes, we're on a deadline, and so we'll have to work through a lot of these things very quickly. These structures, if we're going to do a small structure without a cement pad, there's a lot less regulation. When we start getting into the 10,000 plus square foot area, we're going to certainly want a pad, and we're going to have some large scale infrastructure development and land development most likely. So, all right. So moving on to the design team, I've worked with a lot of folks across the United States, several tribes, on various team components, various members of the team, and I don't have any specific recommendations for folks on board. It kind of depends on the project. It's just all site specific, but as you so essentially, if you have an idea of the volume of produce that you're going to meet in terms of the CARES Act, we'll talk about supplying a community with food. So you're going to have an idea of that ideal production capacity. So many heads of lettuce a week coming out that greenhouse, or so many tomatoes a week. And so that information is going to put a wholesale a greenhouse wholesaler or designer, it's going to give them a starting point, and we can backwards engineer the system, if you will. So if you told me that you want to produce, a 2 million pounds of lettuce a year, we can build and design you a greenhouse and spec out the system from that production goal. And so that's pretty common in the tribal realm. Like, we're trying to meet a certain production capacity, even pre-contract. How it typically operates with a sole proprietor is, I have X dollars, or my bank's approved so much money. So we could also go that route. So if we're working with 300,000 or so, then we can design based on that budget. There's a lot of components that go into a greenhouse operation system. There's a lot of course, you can, watch online videos and educate yourself about some of the production capacity and systems that increase that production capacity potential. And before you talk to a vendor, talk to several vendors, and that'll help you get along. Most importantly, the wholesale folks are sales reps, or salesmen. So they're gonna, everybody's gonna want to sell you their greenhouse, of course. So when it comes time to erect the greenhouse and to put in the utilities, once again, all these things are going to be site specific, and it largely depends on your area. For instance, where I'm in Norman, Oklahoma right now, and I have a greenhouse in operation in Western Oklahoma, and it's really hot. So we have a large fan that runs continuously, and we've got cooling pads, and we're considering installing some overhead shutters, and our next greenhouse is going to be even more advanced with a really tall wall, and additional fans, and a much better capacity for keeping that greenhouse cool, so we can use it during the hottest seasons. Some operations would shut off in the hottest seasons so you can design for that in mind. And so not only the production volume, but also your production schedule is going to greatly influence the type of greenhouse you choose, and how you go about to implement the technology to get you through the elements. So restrooms are going to be probably a component attached to a head house, and that's going to be a structure that is outside of the greenhouse, or that is integrated into the first 10 or 20 foot of the greenhouse structure itself. You're going to sit down and figure out this master plan, your site layout, the ingress, egress, where you're going to store all your soil medium for everything to get you through a whole season. Of course, you're going to be buying these things in quantity, and so you're going to have some pallet management. Ideally, if you're going to have everything stored in a place that precludes any insects from getting on the materials, you're going to be thinking about biosecurity and all of these processes. So we've decided we're going to do greenhouses. We've got a site picked out. We're going to, let's put my watch here. We've picked out a site. We've got all this worked out, and now it's time to put it up to bid. And so this can be, I've seen this done several different ways. These are engineered systems, and so if you go with one greenhouse wholesaler, one vendor, we'll just say vendor for the rest of the talk, but so a particular vendor may recommend tables as well as the greenhouse, and a turnkey system, but you may want a different type of hydroponic system, for instance. Those are both going to be designed very differently, and if you put it out to bid, you're not going to get that same hydroponic system most likely, or that same greenhouse. So it's something to be aware of going into the bidding process. There's a lot of sole source opportunity and different things to have up front when you're planning a project this large, as most tribes well know. We do these big projects all the time. Okay, so we get to the greenhouses. So your entry level market production, small scale vegetable operator that's going to be running about a $40,000 operational budget independent of labor, and maybe selling $80,000 worth of produce a year, is going to be in a freestanding Quonset, Gothic, or gable. That's often going to be dictated on how much money we have for that initial freestanding structure, and they're pretty straightforward and simple. You're like, that's a small scale operation. That's something that we're going to easily be able to pop up, and in the time remaining before the CARES Act funding has to be spent. Gutter connected. So if you wanted a larger space, but you were still in that smaller scale, but you wanted the double or triple capacity, you can gutter connect as many greenhouses as you like. At some point, it becomes more sensible to do a Venlo structure. But so in the 10,000 plus range, you're going to be considering gutter connected 144-foot long greenhouses. And you're going to have a big open bay in that greenhouse. And so that increases productivity, and it makes it more economical to heat and cool these structures, as opposed to building multiple freestanding structures. And so in the commercial units, you're going to be doing a gutter connected. Venlo is the mega greenhouses. So that's the 20,000 square foot plus greenhouses that are going to be like mini cities. And those structures are in the millions of dollars. So, okay, well, go back to gutter connected. So that's going to be like a gutter connected. It's going to be like a $90,000 unit up front, and they can get into 180 or 220 for a site, two greenhouses side by side connected down the middle via gutter. Freestanding, I mean, you can get those for as little as $30,000. Venlo structures are the big ticket items. So here's an image of a freestanding greenhouse. That's 2,880 feet. This one's probably, I think it's 96 by 30, 32. At this scale, it benefits going longer. There's obviously a break point where it doesn't make sense where you can only go so long with a rear greenhouse climate control, and you're going to have additional climate control. And so 96 feet is about the max here in Oklahoma that a typical structure can maintain a cool balance without additional side cooling pads. The gutter connects, and this one has been modified for a retail store. These gutter connect greenhouses can be really sophisticated, and they often have a higher roof. And you'll see there's going to be more emphasis in wall height, which is important, especially for finding trellising crops like tomatoes, where you're going to want to develop that crop up the wall, as high as you can go. These are also more structurally sound, meaning that they're going to support the weight of having a few thousand tomato plants in the greenhouse. And so as you trellis the tomatoes, you're trellising onto an existing steel structure that's often, you have to buy extra. The Venlo greenhouse structures are these mega greenhouses, and they can span several acres. There's currently I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's currently a operation going in at New York that's going to be over 60 acres of production. And so it's just a massive city, and a lot of this advanced, highly structural greenhouse tech has come from Sweden, and I've got some images of some of those. But I forgot to speak to that first title page. If y'all recall, that was shot in the coast of Spain. Here, we'll just go back. There we go. So coast of Spain. So this is a span of freestanding and gutter connect, and just kind of a hodgepodge of all kinds of greenhouses that covers a significant portion of the Spanish coastline, where it's ideal to grow Mediterranean climate. All right, so glazing, there's different types of glazing. And depending on your budget and your latitude, you're going to be choosing a different type of glazing. So obviously in the heat, the glazing doesn't help tremendously. So you're going to be going with a cheap double poly, and that's where you're going to have two pieces of sheet plastic and be pumping air through this double poly. And it's very old tech. It's more akin to the hothouse approach, but it's effective, and you're going to have a UV resistant double wall poly and a shade cloth most likely. Corrugated poly carbonate is more expensive, but it has like these buffered air cells, and so they add a higher R value. I think it's like maybe 5. The polycarbonate and acrylic structured sheet is what you're going to see on a lot of the mega greenhouses, and it's quite a bit more expensive, but you're gonna be investing in that, and you're gonna of course the ultimate is like a glass wide pane that's specifically glazed for greenhouses, but that's going to be like your institutional greenhouses, like Oklahoma State University has quite a bit of glass. So glazing, a consideration is the life of the structure, because it can be pretty intensive to change out the polys. Once you figure it out, you kind of develop a protocol for it. But light transmittance is your main indicator. So essentially, like even after 4 years, if your double wall poly or your double poly looks good, it may not be allowing enough light or as much light to get optimal production out of it. So energy and shade screens, so you can have automated shade screens that are within a venio structure, or a hip jointed nexus veil, for instance, that are going to deploy based on sun intensity or temperature. Or you can just have the shade cloth would be your classic freestanding approach. So there's that, and that can greatly increase your energy conservation in the hot climates, and in the cold climates, these shade cloths can also retain heat in the greenhouse during the night. So they would be deployed in the opposite fashion in a cooler climate. So you're going to need heat. Floor heat is optimal if you're going to do year round. Bench heat is another easy tech that you can implement if you're going to have a water boiler, in a warmer climate, or you're doing winter grow. Then you can distribute heat, and that's going to account for like 15 to 20% of your heat. But it also increases your productivity in the winter months, because you need that rhizosphere, root zone, whatever it is, in your hydroponic water solution is going to be heated. This is going to increase productivity and prevent a lot of disease. Cooling, natural ventilation is an option where you have fan louver systems. You've got maybe a thermostatically controlled lever that opens a big thripe screened window in the top of the greenhouse. There's a lot of different strategies, and everybody kind of tackles this differently in their engineering. Evaporative cooling is common. Nobody in Oklahoma is operating a greenhouse this time of year without evaporative cooling. And so that's a series of these pads that fit into a rail system, and you have water being dispersed over the top of them. It rolls down. It's a swamp cooler is what it is for your greenhouse. And it's significantly more pleasant in a greenhouse than outside, but still not a place you want to take a nap. Horizontal airflow systems. Within the greenhouse system, you're going to have fans that are creating a nice airflow, and that's really important to negate mold, principally mold issues, and but it can also dry out the insects, and hopefully you don't have any bad insects. But we're not even going to go into that level of the production side of it yet. Maybe we can get into the second talk. So the greenhouse production layout. So you've got your site plan. You know what's going to go into the greenhouse. You've got a head house, and you've got somebody there that, you know, ideally you've got your farm manager, your greenhouse production manager, that's going to be on site, you know, doing the work, running things, and so they all have an idea of good flow, you know, dirty in, or dirty in, clean out, or clean in, dirty out, whatever protocol you're using, whether it be growing or getting the food out of there. So you're gonna have a lot of material. If you're utilizing a soilless medium or rock wool, that's going to negate a lot of that, and those are all very compact components. So it facilitates commercial production. Obviously, you got to be thinking about break rooms, bug exclusion zones, receiving and shipping. When it comes to the greenhouse production, it can either be a really sophisticated series of tables, or you can just be growing on the slab. The rock wool blocks that tomatoes are fit in are going to just be grown on a slab. You're going to just drop it right down on a, you know, maybe a run of plastic, and they're going to be in line, so they can be trellised out. If you're doing a nutrient film tech approach, you're going to be growing on tables. It's not uncommon to have a giant trough in these mega greenhouses, where you're going to have essentially like a shallow pond that's a foot to 2 foot deep, and you have these floating trays, and those are really common for microgreens, lettuce production, any kind of herbal production. So greenhouse other, there's a lot of other considerations. The germination and transplanting often have an entirely different environmental requirements. So you're going to want it to be more humid than you would have it in your production greenhouse, maybe warmer than it would be in your production house, or cooler, you know, depends on what you're growing. But that's going to be, that could be an entirely different operation. If you're doing something simple like lettuce, it's a little more straightforward, because you can just plug out the trays in a modified version of your production trays, and then transplant there. A lot of people do buy in their grafted tomatoes, for instance, that are for hydroponic production, instead of doing that themselves. So when I think about that, there's a lot of energy conservation things that we could talk about that are outside of the scope of the greenhouse itself, but still that could be part of the system. I've had some interesting conversations about you know, tapping into the thermal heat, and there's solar. I've got a couple of links for RD coming up. Controls, your freestanding greenhouses are going to be operating kind of the same as greenhouses have operated since the 70s. That you're going to have a thermostat and a few switches to operate your fans and louvers. Once you go to you know, the 10,000 square foot range, it helps to have sensors scattered throughout. You're going to have a computer that's going to be controlling different zones of the greenhouse for heat control and cooling. And these computers aren't anything terribly uncommon these days, but you know, you're going to need somebody sharp to plug that in, and you're going to want to kind of pick out a computer, you know. So if we go back to that initial engagement with the wholesaler, they're going to have a computer that they sell and they're going to recommend, but you may want a different type. So anyways, look at those. Irrigation, that's a whole nother engineered system within a system. Broadly speaking, irrigation for hydroponics is just going to be that continuous loop, or it's going to be a series of tubes that are delivering a nutrient solution on a timed frequency. So hydroponics, non-recovery bag systems, Beto buckets. So it's kind of like a square 5-gallon bucket. Rock wool cubes, we talked about that a bit. Nutrient film technology, it basically looks like a gutter for a house, but it has a specialized lid with holes every X inches, depending on the development of your lettuce plants. Floating trays, that's going to be your largest commercial scale hydroponic production. I've not seen a lot of successful aquaponic projects at any scale. I think they're very cool and educational, but even with some long engagement with DC over do we have any examples of a commercial aquaponics system that's made GAP certification? There was still nothing. Now you can, aquaponics is not precluded from GAP, but it's just going to be very difficult to achieve, and you're going to have two entirely different operational plans, because in one side you're growing, you know, the lettuce or tomatoes, the other side you're growing the fish, and so you're going to have to make some choices on production. So you're either going to grow really good fish or really good lettuce, or be really good at aquaponics and dialing it in. But nevertheless, you're going to have two distinct operations with shipping and receiving issues or considerations. And so I normally, if a tribe is set out to, or producers set out to grow leafy greens or tomatoes or cucumbers or whatever, and they're asking about aquaponics, I kind of just pose this as for their consideration. And we can talk more in detail about hydroponics. If somebody has got a hydroponic project right now, of course, we're gonna get to that. As soon as y'all need, just let us know. We need the feedback. Alternative energy and grant assistance. There's a lot of great programs that you can build into the development, the long-term development of this operation. And RD, the REAP program. So let's get this thing built. We'll spend that money, and then we can go into RD and apply for some grants to help us tie in solar or the thermal heating. The Department of Energy has some grants available. There's a few that if we have time after questions, we can maybe go over some of these sites. The Department of Environmental Quality is somebody to look at. That's just, three to look at real quickly. There's also some smaller ones. So stocking the greenhouse, you're gonna be getting you're either gonna have somebody design you a turnkey system, or your plant production team is going to have a huge itemized list of all the things they need for a year. So the soilless mediums, the chemicals, pesticides, be it organic or conventional, on stock, ready to go. And so you're going to want to, think about, you're going to want to package that all into the operation, so you make sure that it's sustainable for a season. And you're going to want to think about, storing all this material while you're doing your site plans. I already kind of covered this, acquiring plants versus propagation, because it truly is two separate types of operation. And so it may be one of those things where you have a gutter connected Nexus valve, or a series of them, and you have a propagation greenhouse built independently of that operation. So you can roll out your propagation, because production area is what's making you the money. And so I've just seen a lot of people get spun out trying to schedule the timing of their plants arriving and getting the things they need grown up before, or seeds arriving and everything they need to grow up their plants to start their production year. So you're going to be, you're going to be increasing the amount of time you're heating that greenhouse and employees on hand and all kinds of variables. So do the math. So cultivar selection for greenhouse systems. In the commercial world, we're principally operating in hydroponic systems, soilless mediums, rock wool, cocoa. They have cultivars selected specifically for these hydroponic systems, and so we've got a series of plant breeders in the world that have bred plants that thrive in hydroponics. And of course, heirlooms, you can grow anything hydroponically, but you're going to have a better yield with the cultivars that are selected for that production model. There's very few commercial heirloom production models out there that are really successful. And that also changes every year, so what's hip this year may be hip, maybe not hip next year. I was just looking at, there's a brown tomato and a purple tomato that is like has a umami qualities to them, and that's the hot item right now. And they're selling them in like 6-packs for $10. And these are small little tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, in hot climates. You're going to get a lot of yield, or if you're just trying to feed people, they also have a good shelf life. So there's a lot of variables that I would take into account if I was designing the production model or making recommendations for a group or tribe that was going to do this. So are we trying to grow the greatest volume of food? Are we trying to grow the most valuable, tastiest food? There's a lot of variabilities, and the cultivars that are selected for hydroponics, just like heirlooms, range in flavor quality. And so some of them are going to be your just kind of red tomato that's gassed right before they slice it up and put it on your hamburger, basically, and they're harvested green and they taste of cardboard. And then there's some really good cultivars of hydroponic specific tomatoes, hybrid tomatoes. Reputable seed suppliers are imperative for commercial production. I mean, and by reputable, I should have changed that word to commercial, just left it at commercial seed suppliers, like really large scale operations that specialize in mass production. So you get crop uniformity. So you want a narrower, well-developed hybrid. So you're going to get that standardization for tomato size and quality and color, or whatever it is, heads of lettuce. So that's all that's important, and it goes into the genetics. So you're going to get your highest yield and most consistent production that way. All right, so I pulled up an example, and we're going to try an experiment. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about this place first, but then we're going to try to do a link and a virtual tour. Bright Farms, I found this in an article on Ag Thunder News, and just thought this would be great to share with the group to give us something so we can get our eyes on an operation. So they're operating at 280,000 square feet, and they at a cost at 8.3 million, and they produce 2 million pounds of greens per year. Well, so the cost of that greenhouse structure, and it was a Vimlo structure, is $65,000 a square foot, which is not uncommon for a greenhouse. They're going to range anywhere from 30 to 60 $60 a square foot, or 65. These are massive operations that employ 55 people or more, and they've since built several more. So so let's go and see if we can. Okay, I'm getting a bad message here. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing this, and I have to share a screen. Oh, here we are. Okay, I'll make that large. All right, so y'all should be hearing the video. Kier, tell me if you're not.
Don't hear much. Make sure that you're on mute throughout the video.
Okay, I need to mute. All right.
Or you don't, yeah, don't mute.
Oh, don't mute. Okay, so I'm
We're seeing the video, but we're not hearing sound, I don't think. Yeah, we saw the video there, Stephen, but yeah, no sound. Oh, I think you're muted too.
Okay, the sound of the video was less important than seeing the video. So hopefully everybody got to see that. So you can see within those structures, it's a massive open area. I've been in greenhouses that traversed like virtually the city or a small town in South Dakota. There's it was the first operation I'd visited at that scale called Bluebird, and they're a ornamental operation, but they have so they had a very sophisticated operation, also cement slab massive structures, and they had the sliding table system. So so these things can get really complex, but they're they're also they can also be really simple. That was an example of a relatively simple, straightforward operation that utilized flood and flats, and they're taking the flats, they got a conveyor belt, and those are all harvested for market. So so that's a really great one, and you can go to their site and see a few other videos. They've got some really good videos. But all right, so next slide. Oh, so a lot of this technology was developed in overseas, and so you're going to be dealing with at these large scales. You're actually going to be buying these things from overseas usually, and there's going to be some lead outs. So so I highly recommend getting your orders in. Some of you are going to be dealing with issues in your state where you're going to be competing for resources with the medical marijuana growers and the CBD producers. In Oklahoma right now, it'd be difficult to get a greenhouse erected in such short time, or maybe even to get it delivered in the time required, because there's a huge demand in greenhouse production right now. And I wanted to save plenty of time because we covered a lot of material for questions. And so let's see. Oh, but okay, since we've saved plenty of time, I'm gonna share another screen. So bear with me while I pull this up. So share screen. Okay, so here's AmHydro. They're a well-respected, one of the oldest institutions of a sort in hydroponic production. And I thought Kira, are you seeing this PowerPoint from AmHydro? Okay, yeah, I think so. All right, so so I'll just go through this with y'all. AmHydro, you can just pull them up, or there may be a link for them on the PowerPoint, I forget. But so this is a $10,000 small business bundle. And so obviously you wouldn't be growing in the greenhouse that they have portrayed here. But we'll go through here. You've got your nutrient film technology, the NFT systems. They're going to get you, this is basic startup. This doesn't include a greenhouse. So tank and house components, propagation system, growing supplies. And with AmHydro and a lot of these vendors, you can subscribe to a production production it's production subscription. They bring you all the seeds and fertilizer and soilless medium, and everything is delivered off of one semi for each growing season. Or you can source things independently. So often you're going to find a cost savings with picking one of these wholesale providers. So we'll just go through here. You've got some controllers, you've got all your channels that's required. What's not included is the greenhouse site prep and all that. So you're going to need a lot of that. They have some recommendations. Of course, they'll sell you greenhouses too, so you can get it from the hydroponics side as well. It all depends on your production strategy and what you're growing versus crop turn and systems. Here's a kind of a visual of what one of these systems look like. This is a very small scale system. So this is something that a farmer's market person would buy, you know, to subsidize their growing season or extend their growing season, or maybe they have a contract or two with a restaurant or a small grocery chain. And here's some of the greenhouses that they have. All right, lighting packages, so you can add on, you know, to these packages. You can get the greenhouse, everything you want. It's all turnkey. Here's even some pressure washer options for cleaning the trays after everything's broken down as part of your standard operating procedures. And so here's a turnkey operation right there. All right, I'm going to stop sharing this page, and I'll share another page. If that pulled. Let's go back here. Oh, here we go. So here's that AmHydro page. It is amhydro.com, amhydro.com. And they're one of many people that provide hydroponic systems. So obviously we're not in the business of recommending just one person. The recommendation would change depending on what you're trying to accomplish and where you're at in the country and all kinds of variables. But here's one of them as an example. They just had a really nice website, and you can come down and take a look at their bundles and look at their greenhouses. Nexus Vel is kind of the Cadillac model here in Oklahoma. It's got a really high, for a greenhouse option, it's got really high walls. It's great for tomato production. It's a nice cool climate. If you're in the specialty operations stage, it works for that. So there's that. I pulled up the RD just to show you that we can get this greenhouse popped in and still have time to apply for some grant assistance on a big solar system or whatever it is to subsidize our operation. Here's some energy.gov opportunities. We can go into more detail or have an entirely different conversation about that. It's less important than getting y'all situated and scoping, helping you to scope and to visualize what one of these operations is going to look like, and where you need to start and what to expect was kind of the intent of this. Here's some clean energy programs from EPA. Let's see. I think it would be so now it'd be a good time to go back to questions.
Stephen, can you go and post those links into the chat so folks can take a look at those programs and that website? Thank you so much. Great. Any questions? Feel free to, post them into the chat or the Q&A section. And we also have folks joining us on Facebook, so feel free to post questions. One question I had right out the gate would be, a lot of tribes, Stephen, I'm sure you've been exposed to this out in your region as well, or, developing climate change plans.
Yeah.
If they're looking at, if a tribe is looking at ensuring that they have redundancy in their food supply and want to consider some of the implications to climate change, in their planning process, what things might you offer for them to consider, or resources would you point them to?
Well, it could be part of a decision chain that leads you to greenhouse production, because then you're going to have more control of the environmental variability. Obviously, we've had some devastating weather events. These things are engineered to 115, 120 mile an hour winds. It depends on the structure. It's also a good reason to spend that upfront cost and getting a quality structure. A lot of folks ask me about some of the more common vendors, like FarmTech is the most commonly asked about. And I'd take a look at the gauge of steel for the greenhouse structure and have somebody that's familiar with structural engineering kind of, be a part of that conversation. Hydroponics are going to use 90% less water than field grown production, and you're going to get an application a multiplication effect of like 10 to 1 for productivity versus field production, with the benefit of year-round production out of a hydroponic system. So hydroponics itself could be a tool in greenhouse production. You know, it's hard to plan for climate change, but these greenhouses would handle a buffer of, you know, an increase in temperature, or more cloudy days could be detrimental to greenhouse producers. You're going to have mold issues. You're going to have a lighting system, for instance. So now you have more control over that growing environment. So you're going to have better luck than being outside.
Another question, can you talk a little bit about some of the common potential foibles or trip-ups that you've bared witness to when tribes engage with contractors or third parties for greenhouse infrastructure? So things that participants might need to keep in mind if they're starting to engage with, you know, salespeople, or you know, starting that process of considering how to allocate some resources.
Absolutely. So I put a whole slide in to address the bidding process. You know, it's not uncommon to bring folks out of state that specialize in greenhouse production or hydroponics to help with these projects. Some of the biggest issues, you know, would be to not have a good working understanding of all the components that go into an operation. So you're gonna fall short on your budget in the front end. If you don't have you know, for the CARES Act, I mean, we're trying to get food distribution out to the communities, but, you know, eventually these structures are going to become production structures and be integrated into broader contracting. So, you know, just be thinking about your market, because you don't want this thing to run for a couple of years and then there's no market to move this produce. Cold storage, you know, is something that could be an attribute. Some things, you know, you don't cold storage tomatoes, but if you have picking the wrong heating source would be detrimental. Propane's very expensive. If you have natural gas, then you're in pretty good shape. But looking at the distance of somebody has to haul that propane, or the cost of propane, thinking about weather access is something that's come up in the last few weeks, talking to tribes about CARES Act funding for greenhouse production. There are a lot of cheap alternatives to propane and natural gas, but that needs to be part of that initial determination. Just getting, if you were going to do a tomato production in Oklahoma, there's a timeline for a crop season, you know, especially if we're down to if we're talking about money and production models, you know. So it doesn't make sense to start producing it too late in the season, because you're going to be slowed up, and you're not going to get fruit till the field produce comes in, you know, and then you're going to lose your advantage for price point. You know, just identifying the right person to operate this thing is going to be critical in all the communities, and you're going to want to have that person trained while we're building and developing this layout. A lot of the like Hydro, they'll send a site supervisor while you're erecting a greenhouse structure to help with the process. They also have in-house training, so they'll send somebody out and train you in your own facility, or they'll develop a custom training session for a tribe where they can, and I'm not promoting just Hydro, you know, any of the vendors, a custom training session where you can go and work with them directly in their operations. Getting engaged with your extension, if they're heavily involved in horticulture and greenhouse production, would be a good step. But most importantly, a lot of these operations fail because that one person that can just pull it together and keep it going is not identified up front. So it's really important to find your a well-established grower to take on a project like this. This is a big operation, and it needs to be properly staffed. You got to have a lot of crew to trellis and trim and keep this going. If you start, I see a lot of budgets kind of get trimmed on the sides. That's probably going to happen. Definitely keep the you got to do bug inclusion and biosecurity, and don't scrimp on that greenhouse structure, because you don't want it falling down in a 80-mile-an-hour wind, and then you lose the whole thing.
Any other questions coming in? Let's see. One about, let's see, looks like, okay, hold on. Yeah, with operational expenses, there might be an initial infusion of funding to get a lot of the infrastructure going. And you've touched on this a little bit in your presentation. But and of course the operational expenses are going to be relative to scale and crop type and the like. But what are you considering when you're thinking about various scales and operational expenses, and what do tribes need to be thinking about? That'll be fixed costs versus variable costs.
Yeah. So. That's the beauty of grant funding, is we get a lot of that. We can trim down our operational costs, but we're still going to have to staff this and bring in the materials, and hydroponics can be really expensive. So on that 30 by 90 scale, you're going to be spending $40,000 in just materials to operate throughout the year. What I see in a lot of ag groups, departments, programs across Indian country is they're usually pretty small, and especially the groups that are trying to do stuff like this. So they may have 3 or 4 employees, and it's going to be they're going to be pushing capacity at like maybe a triple gutter connect that's 30 by 90. So that's a consideration.
Thank you. A couple other questions coming in here. So one from Samantha shares that the reservation has conventional farmers, but no one's trained in this type of work. How do we train our members for this type of work? So you mentioned that briefly, that it sounds like some of these turnkey outfits will provide direct training, but there's some other considerations for tribal staff to gain the types of skill sets that would be necessary to run operations.
Yeah, they're going to be, so this is a paid service, through a lot of these greenhouse manufacturers that are also operators in some cases. So it's going to be so easy to, like, while you're talking to them and you're already spending $500,000 to get a greenhouse, they're going to integrate some training for hydroponic production if you buy their greenhouse, kind of deal. And so so that may be part of your consideration for choosing a vendor. If there are plenty of academic options, so you can get somebody trained up very quickly in the production scale, as we're trying to get some produce out, because we have to do that. But then you may have some folks, audit some classes at their local university and learn more about the more day-to-day operations, the business aspects of it, the plant pests and disease identification, operating not only operating the water quality components, but understanding the chemistry behind it. And so those are the insights you're going to gain from going to university. But for the immediate rollout of one of these things, work with your vendor that you're buying the greenhouse from. They're going to have somebody to recommend as well. Talk to your local extension folks, get them involved, and see what is available in your region. Or you may be, because we're also in a restricted travel time. because otherwise you would be like flying out to California to tour a big facility and spend a 5-day intensive with their production staff. But that's going to be one of the best ways to do it, really, is just get a total immersion. And they're going to have some kind of a guidance manual or something that they've created, you know, as part of their educational package for onboarding folks for these systems.
Great. Questions are starting to flow in. So if tribes do not have within their staff or within their community certain skill sets, excuse me, that would be inclined towards greenhouse production, what for smaller scales, which would be the what types of personnel would they need to hire out?
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, if you have one person that understands the operational components of one of these systems, where they're going to be, you know, monitoring the water quality and looking for pests and training the additional folks, you know, you can bring on people that are that don't mind, you know, crouching and lifting and the you know, environmental. Even though you have control of the environment, and you know, it can still be really hot in a greenhouse. So it's kind of like any other farm labor work, you know. So the additional staff, independent of the production manager, could just, you know, just needs to be scrappy and willing to learn and can handle the physical demands of a greenhouse system. Now, if you go the route in a commercial system where you're going to be doing your propagation, you're probably going to have a propagation manager and a production manager, and they're going to have independent teams. And so, because like for lettuce production, you're going to be growing lettuce weekly or receiving shipments of lettuce weekly to put into these systems, or transferring lettuce from seed into the grow out. Slots, tomatoes, you know, would be a little different. It's kind of like a one crop a year, zucchini, cucumber. But yeah, if you have one person that's really knowledgeable that can train the rest of the folks, or two people that you can send to these trainings, then that would be great.
Great. Thank you. You mentioned delays in products. Since there is a deadline with the CARES Act monies to be expended, has anyone heard of any leeway the government will allow if projects are held up by delays being related to COVID-19? Short question, has there been any word of government expanding the expending of CARES Act funds past December? So I have heard that, you know, there are talks about it being extended, but nothing has been solidified. And so that is something you're going to need to follow up with, contact at Treasury or you know, possibly your legal team about. But yeah, I understand that, you know, there might be some leeway around if funding is already allocated but not yet expended. But again, that's not something that we can offer, you know, a lot of direct guidance on. It's going to be something you need to consult with your contacts through your CARES Act team.
So I'm reading a few of the additional questions, and I thought it'd be nice to just real quickly frame this up for a lot of the tribes. So for a lot of the tribes, this is going to be something that's complementing their programs that are already in existence. So it's something that's extending your fresh produce availability. And so if you're already doing field production, there are certain species that are more suited for field production, like our ancestral crops, the, you know, corn, beans, and squash. A lot of the melons, things like that, are typically going to be grown outdoors in field production. And so your most common crops grown in a hydroponic system or greenhouse operation is going to be tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, some squash, but not real common. Zucchini's it's a matter of quality and sellability. The herbs, lettuce, any of your greens or salad mixtures, a lot of the Asian greens. So these systems are optimized for those type of hybrids to grow in these systems. There are some examples of hydroponic systems being utilized to to grow seed potatoes that would then be put out into field production, but not really common. So you're going to be, developing your production strategy, and ideally, in a commercial model, you're going to be growing one or two things really well, because your nutrient solution is going to be specific to optimize one type of plant's growth. And you can get, you can see a hip jointed system where half of it's lettuce, half of it's tomatoes, but you're going to have lettuce in some of the season, and tomatoes in another part of the season, because the growing conditions are entirely different. So that's the point of the greenhouse, is really to dial in a production strategy for one type of produce. Oh, thank you. And another question, we're definitely, we're going to have this part 2 to continue this conversation, and to touch on a few other aspects of infrastructure development. And please send in the questions, to us in the meantime, so we can develop the presentation around that too. But I think that there is going to be continued programming in the realm of horticulture and greenhouse production on our Mighty network.
Yeah, absolutely echo what Stephen just shared, that this presentation, along with next week's and future presentations, will be built out into our IAC's Mighty Networks platform as workshops on these various topic areas. So we definitely encourage you to take a look at mightynetworks.com and search for Intertribal Agriculture Council and sign up there, so that you can be exposed to a lot of different training topics that we're rolling out. Any other questions? Alrighty, and let's see, I think that's it. Let me check one more spot. Alrighty, yeah, we've had wonderful participation throughout the duration of the time together today. Looks like one more question came in. How do I check availability of funding through CARES Act? Well, let's see. So tribal communities have been engaging with the process directly in coordination with U.S. Treasury, as well as Bureau of Indian Affairs, depending on the funding source, for a few months now. And I believe disbursements have occurred. Multiple disbursements have occurred. So, if your tribal community has received CARES Act funds, you'd be talking with the committee that was established to look at developing the kind of the plan that will be submitted back to either BIA or Treasury. Or if it's something that your community has not partaken in, we can help to maybe field that question offline, just to help to support the process of looking to see if there's other funding sources available, or if the funding source we've been focusing on today through the CARES Act, we might have information that could be helpful to you there. So at this point, we can't maybe advise much beyond that. Stephen, do you have anything else on that?
Well, just so this type of funding is granted to the tribe or the states, and then the states may have broader funding opportunities. A loan that you don't have to pay back, or whatever it is. So it would be specific to each tribe. So it's going to be your tribe that's applying for the CARES Act funding, most likely in your community. And then you would be applying through something through the tribe. So get a hold of your tribe and see if they have any grant programs that are subsequent to their CARES Act funding. But that's my best understanding of how this money is rolling out.
Great. All right. So.
Oh, great. So Becky, feel free to get a hold of me. I'm right down the road, and so we can talk greenhouses or whatever y'all are doing in Seminole. So the Stephen at indianag.org.
You want to put that in the chat, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. While Stephen's doing that, I'd like to just again thank everybody for your engagement today and for your participation. And Stephen, thank you so much. The information was very, very helpful, I think, to the process of just being exposed to, key considerations in the process, of looking at greenhouse infrastructure within tribal communities. And, it's wonderful to have your expertise lent to this ongoing conversation that IAC has been engaging in around supporting tribes and allocating resources towards agricultural infrastructure. So if that's the extent of the questions for today, Stephen, do you have any parting words?
These are, these are large scale projects, even at that smallest commercial greenhouse production strategy, or there's a lot of components that go into this. So so feel free to reach out to me or to the group. They're all site specific, so we're going to have some conversation. We can get you guys pointed in the right direction, and just happy growing. That's all I got.
Great. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we really appreciate your participation today. Thank you.